Let me tell you something. If you'd ever stood up there in Eldridge at dawn, with the clouds so low they brush your face and the world is nothing but mist and pine and silence, you'd know why a man like Elias could disappear into the mountains for years and folks down in the valley would let their fears do the talking for them. You know what I mean? They called him a beast. They said his hands were rough enough to break stone and his eyes were colder than the river ice in January. And nobody wanted to know what made him that way. Not really, because the truth was, most people just didn't care. Elias kept to himself, chopped wood from sunup to sundown. And if the wind carried the village gossip up the trail, he just let it pass through him, like he was nothing but another stone on the ridge. But here's the thing, nobody ever asks if a man like that aches at night, when the fire's burned low and there's nothing but his own heartbeat echoing off the cabin walls. Nobody wonders if maybe, just maybe, he misses the world he left behind, even if he'd never admit it. Down in the valley, there was Clara, her hair catching the sunlight like copper, her laugh ringing out across the general store even on the grayest mornings, and you'd see even the old men cracking a grin just to hear it. But Clara, she was restless, always thinking about what might be waiting for her beyond shelves of flour and nails, and if she'd be stuck her whole life behind that counter, counting other people's dreams. Now, stories about the mountain man always swirled around the store. Some folks whispered he was cursed, others swore he was just plain mad. But Clara, she wasn't afraid of stories. She was curious. Why did a man turn his back on the whole world? One autumn morning, with the wind snapping cold and the store shelves running low, Clara volunteered to hike up the mountain to find some herbs before the trader's cart arrived, and people looked at her like she'd just announced she was heading off to dance with wolves. "He's just a man," Clara said, tightening her shawl, more for the comfort of the words than the warmth, and I swear I saw a spark in her eyes. Like the fear made her want it more. So up she went, boots crunching frost, the trail twisting through tangled pines, her basket empty, but her heart beating loud and sure. By the time she spotted smoke rising through the trees, her breath was coming in clouds, and her nerves had turned into something electric. She knocked on the cabin door, half expecting no answer, but when Elias opened it, man, he filled the whole frame, shoulders wide as a barn door, eyes sharp and wary like he'd already measured her for trouble. "What do you want?" he rumbled, and Clara, standing there with the wind at her back, told him straight up about the herbs she needed. He grunted, let her in, told her to keep near the fire because the storm was rolling in fast. You ever step into a room and feel the air change? That's what it was like. His cabin was bare but warm, shadows flickering on the logs. And when Elias passed her a mug of tea, his fingers brushed hers and the moment jolted through her. Nothing to do with fear, all to do with something she'd never let herself feel before. He wasn't much for words, but his silence said enough. Like every scar on his hands had a story he wasn't ready to tell. But Clara, she pressed him, in that gentle way of hers, asking about his life. And for the first time he talked about losing his family, about sickness and the world turning cold, and you could hear it in his voice, that ache he hid from everyone else. The storm raged, wind shrieking outside. But inside that cabin something else was brewing. Clara leaned closer, her hand grazing his arm, and you could feel the tension coil tight as a bowstring. He showed her his collection of herbs, said his mother taught him the ways to heal, and as she steadied his hand over the mortar, his pulse leapt under her touch, eyes wide like he'd been caught off guard by kindness itself. When dawn broke, the storm had passed, but something had shifted. Clara's feet wouldn't move to leave, and Elias watched her like a man afraid hope might shatter if he reached for it. "You don't belong up here," he said, not unkindly. Clara just laughed, told him maybe she did, and he looked at her like he'd never seen anything so strange or so wonderful. She promised to come back, and over the next days, she found excuses to climb the mountain, bringing him bread, stories, questions that stripped away his defenses until even Elias couldn't pretend he didn't look forward to her knock at the door. The village noticed, of course. Folks started warning Clara, saying she'd ruin herself over a wild man. But she didn't care, not anymore. And every night by the fire, the line between visitor and home grew fainter. Here's where it twists. A young trapper named Sam, just passing through the valley, heard the tales and decided to see for himself what kind of monster lived up there. He followed Clara one evening, hidden by the dusk, hoping to catch a glimpse, maybe stir up trouble, but when he slipped and twisted his ankle on the trail, it was Elias, this so-called beast, who carried him down the mountain, wordless but careful, setting Sam down at the village edge and vanishing before dawn. After that, some people started to see Elias differently. Whispers softening to curiosity, Clara's visits grew longer. The touch of her hand lingered on his, and one night when she reached for him, there was no fear left, just that wild, thundering pulse in both their chests. Spring came, thawing the peaks, and Clara moved into the cabin. Everyone was stunned, the bright store girl choosing the mountain man. But Elias built her a garden, carved her a chair he called her throne, and they built a world in the shadow of the ridge, their laughter and silence woven together like roots in the earth. The village changed, too. Kids grew up on stories of the mountain man and the woman who saw through the myths. Villagers came to Elias for remedies and advice, and the fear faded away. The couple's daughter was born, wild as her mother, wise as her father, roaming the peaks learning the stars and the healing herbs. The cabin, once a lonely place, was now a home filled with warmth and laughter, the old ghosts exorcised by love and stubborn hope. Years rolled by. Clara's hair silvered, but her spirit never dulled. She and Elias sat by the fire, hands entwined, the same spark in his chest every time she touched him, the proof that some things never fade. The mountain was theirs, and the legend grew, a tale not of a beast, but of a love that could outlast even the hardest winter. Their daughter carried the legacy, and the fear that once haunted Eldridge turned to stories of healing and courage. One last winter, Clara fell ill. Elias stayed by her side, brewing her herbs with hands gentler than anyone would believe, holding her through the long nights. "Feel my heart," she whispered, and he did, finding that same wild racing he'd known since the day she first knocked at his door. When she passed, the cabin felt empty, but her love lingered in every carved beam, every petal in the garden. Elias lived on, teaching their daughter, keeping Clara alive in stories, and folks in the valley. Well, some said it was the woman who tamed the mountain. Others said the mountain had finally found its heart. But I'll tell you this, if you ever stand at the edge of Eldridge as the sun goes down, and you see the light burning in that cabin window, you'll know the truth. Sometimes, love is all it takes to change a legend. And sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is knock on a stranger's door and refuse to leave. So tell me, do you think the villagers were right to fear what they didn't understand? Or was it Clara's stubborn hope that changed everything? Drop a comment below, share what you'd have done, what you think about love, fear, and second chances. Because out here, sometimes the real story is the one we're afraid to tell.